You're listening to the Reinvention Podcast. My name is Dr. Keisha Siriboe, and today we will be discussing the value of strengthening parent-child bonds through literacy and reading aloud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Hayes.
And I'm Angela Bode, and we're joined by Dr. Keisha today. How are you?
I am so excited to be here. I've been giggling since this started.
Oh, yeah. We're so pumped for you to be here with us today. And before we start, we'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather virtually today. Angie and I are on Wurundjeri land, which is part of Kulin country. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also for those on whichever land you're all on today. We'd also like to pay our respects to elders of all other cultures present today.
I would like to acknowledge the stolen land on which I currently reside, which is Shawnee land. And I also want to acknowledge not only the stolen land that I reside on, but the stolen ancestors that were brought to cultivate and work this land. So I also take a moment to acknowledge my ancestors that were brought to these shores, and I acknowledge the indigenous ancestors that were forcefully removed from this land.
Well, I am personally so excited for this episode. As a working parent of a toddler, to say that this pandemic has been anything but tough is a complete understatement. Joining us today is Dr. Keisha. We're so happy for you to be here today. She is a scholar, a researcher, and an international advocate of literacy education and student leadership development. She is the founder of Dr. Keisha Cares, which is an early childhood literacy consulting service for parents, educators, and concerned adults specializing in strengthening parent-child bonds through reading aloud, promoting culturally diverse picture books, research-based practices to promote a lifelong love of reading. There are lots of amazing resources available on the Dr. Keisha Cares website, and we encourage everyone straight after this episode to go and check it out. And you'll find more details about this in our show notes. And before setting up Dr. Keisha Cares, she set up Stories of Us, which is a social enterprise providing parent-child early literacy programs in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
You've done a lot in this space, Keisha.
I was trying not to interrupt, but I was like, come on, Kat, with the research. Come on, Kat, with the research. You better run the facts. Tell them.
So today's episode is focused on the importance of literacy as an amazing way to build resilience and hope in families. And I think that in this time right now, we need that hope and resilience more than ever. As part of this episode, we asked parents in our audience to offer up their anxieties, their struggles, and questions for Dr. Keisha regarding literacy and the impact this pandemic is having on them and their families. Yeah. So stay tuned for a special segment in this episode where Dr. Keisha addresses your questions and provides some actionable tools and techniques for parents out there.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now as well. And it really is such an important topic that we're unpacking here today for both parents and non-parents as well. We've all been witnessing this massive shift in everyone's lives and in the lives of families this year. As we know, a majority of countries worldwide announced temporary closures of schools. And then we found that it was more than 91% of students worldwide were out of school.
Yes.
By April 2020, we have close to 1.6 billion children and youth were out of school. That's a big number. That's a lot of kids. And as part of this, we're starting to see how COVID-19 is hitting the most vulnerable people the hardest. Yeah. And those very same groups are often experiencing increased discrimination. And one of these is being access to remote quality education. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Keisha, just to start off here, what is your greatest concern when it comes to the relationships parents have with their kids at the moment?
My most crucial and critical concern in this global pandemic is that the mental health of adults is fortified, because from the adult, the child looks to the adult for their comfort, for their guidance. And if the adult's mental health isn't fortified, if they don't feel supported, like before, COVID, a lot of our understanding on how we were looking at education and literacy, we sort of looked at the adult as a contributing factor. We said they were the first, teacher, but we never looked at them as the primary, all-encompassing teacher. And so a lot of the supports that they were given was always done with the assumption that there was a teacher somewhere in that foreground, somewhere in that background. And a lot of the way adults and parents have been socialized is that the school system is there, or there's someone who is the credentialed or has the education that comes alongside and supports them in the education. So they didn't have to be quote unquote perfect, or they didn't need to know everything. They just needed to be strong in this area, maybe be awesome on the weekend and, great in the morning and great in the evening. But that bulk of the day, someone else was going to step in and support them, or they were paying people to make sure that this occurred in a useful way. And 2020 dramatically changed that narrative. And I pay such great attention to adult mental health, because what's hidden in this moment is that when you approach it in that landscape of someone else is going to step in, what we never deal with are all the unhealed issues that some adults may be carrying around their own schooling experiences. Everyone may not have had a dynamic teacher. Some people may have been picked on. Some people may be extremely insecure about their reading. Some people may have stuttered as children. Some people may be dyslexic. So some of these triggers that they may have felt were behind them because now they're adults and they've navigated their way through the world, suddenly it's being thrown back in their faces as they have to sit down and work with their child. And if you step outside of that scenario, maybe it's an adult who has a fear of failure. And they're carrying the fear that they're failing within their job, and they're terrified that they're failing as a parent. And those fears are becoming their focus. It's so funny how, children's literature, like as I say this to you, I immediately think of a children's story that talks about Ruby and her worries, and how there's this worry that just keeps growing bigger and bigger as the story progresses. And I feel like that's where a lot of adults are. Like, there's this worry that you're going to get fired. There's this worry that you're not the best parent. There's this worry that you're not producing enough results. And as that gets bigger and bigger, your ability to see the bigger picture, that it's a global pandemic. You are parenting in an unprecedented time in our history as humanity. We have never had to rely on technology to educate our children. We have never had to educate our children outside of the support of community, be it school, be it relatives. And so all of this is brand new. And so you have that temptation when all of this is just inside of your mind to create these worlds where everything is, apocalyptic. Or you may push down the worry for that day, but that bad boy springs right back up at the first sign of insecurity or the first negative comment or at the child, because they're dealing with this at the same time as you are. And so for me, adult mental health is everything. So creating ways to I create these 10-minute curriculums, and I enjoy it. Like, I find ways to create online content that reminds adults to find 10 minutes in the day and do something you enjoy, whether it's breathing, whether it's an affirmation. I use the foundational concepts that I apply within early childhood literacy: talk, read, sing, play. And I adapted that to speak to the adult. Talk is always an affirmation. Recently, and stop me at any time, because we're in my area and I love it. Like, I'll turn this into a lecture if you don't interrupt me, because this is my passion.
No, but you're so right though, because I think, it's so important for parents to know that they need to take a time out as well. creating space for themselves, even if it is just 10 minutes in a day, to be able to step away and look after themselves. So next question I had was, what are you seeing in terms of what kids are struggling with the most at the moment?
Oh, man. Now, because I'm in the early childhood sector, it is a wide range depending on where your child is. And I usually work with, elementary all the way to newborns. So for those lucky parents who are either the child is still in the womb or the child just got here, you dodged the bullet. You dodged the bullet, because all you really had to do is love on your child and play with them, like things you don't need larger structures to do. But for the parents who are dealing with toddlers, who were used to going to daycare, who were dealing with, socialization and expanding the world beyond themselves, some of the hardest things for a lot of adults to adjust to is, they may be seeing behavior changes in their children. Some children may be regressing. They may, revert back to practices, whether it be wanting to be held, sucking their thumbs, like these comforting measures that they may have, grown out of, or maybe even potty training may suddenly become an issue because Kat, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. Stress in a child does not look like stress in an adult. And in one of my YouTube videos, I talk about this ad nauseum. I think it's the YouTube video, Using Books as Band-Aids. And I also talk about it in COVID Worries. But using Harvard's research, I really tried to paint a picture and show that your child doesn't have the mental capacity to sit down on the couch and just, vent and tell you everything that's worrying them about the fact that it's been several weeks since they've been able to see their friends. And that what is the heaviest for me is that in the early childhood world, routine is everything.
Yeah.
And so for some of our children, they may have been looking forward to the day that they got to be head of the line, or that, they were in line for some big accomplishment in school, or something that they had to wait their turn for it to happen. And COVID robbed them of that. And they have no recourse. Like, how do I explain to my parents that it was my day to play with such and such, or it was my turn for show and tell, or I was looking forward to this big moment that suddenly didn't happen? We don't have the vocabulary to explain that to a small child. We were able to do some of that with like our older kids who were dealing with graduations that they couldn't experience. But how do we, help a child who, is used to routine, who had been looking forward to something? Like any parent who's had to deal with a child who's had a birthday during this closure, when outside was closed, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because your child may have spent a year or several months or, whatever their attention span is, planning what the birthday party was going to look like. And so helping parents navigate those conversations and not take it personal, because you don't have the power to, make this situation go away, but you definitely have the ability to comfort and buffer and reduce the stress of this moment if you know how to first deal with it within yourselves.
Yeah, because I also think, like when I think about my friends and what people in the community are saying, like when kids are starting to act out this way, it becomes another compounding issue for them. I'm failing my child. Like, why are they having sleep issues again? Like, I'm just going to stick my hand up here. Why are they having sleep issues again? Why are they having difficulties with this? I thought that they would be walking by now. These are questions that I keep hearing people saying. Like, I'm failing them as a parent. I'm not spending enough time with them. They're not getting enough exercise. And it goes back to the first comment that you were talking about this compounding anxiety that keeps, and so like when we see our kids behave this way, a lot of the time, it's just another thing that we stress about, it comes back to us, but we don't actually, there isn't an awareness around the fact that kids are actually going through trauma just as much as we are, you know, and like the thing that you were saying about like, I was looking forward to my birthday, or I was looking forward to show and tell, or I was looking forward to seeing my friends, or like I'm going to primary school next year. This is my last year in kindergarten. We not, as adults, we may not see that as big things, you know, but for them, they're grieving that loss as well. You know, we just don't see it that way all the time.
Yeah, and like I said, I do these 10-minute curriculums that I share online, and each one has a quote. And in the background, I have some form of a brick wall. And it's very intentional in the way that I set this up. So you have some brick wall, and then you have this quote. The brick wall symbolizes the acknowledgement that this work isn't easy. You know, even though I have this motivational quote and we have this curriculum, I want you to understand that we're chipping away at very hard, very difficult things, but it can eventually fall. But I want you to know that resilience takes time. Like, you can't just break through a brick wall. You know, you got to put some effort into that. And then you have the quote. And the quote for the most recent curriculum that I shared on Monday was by Lucille Clifton. And it said, "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." I want adults to first celebrate what they have overcome. It is very easy to take an inventory of everything that is going wrong. Like, if we look at the way in which this conversation has naturally unfolded, we can go for hours talking about all of the craziness. But I find that right about now, like, one of the first things I want to tell any listener, create a gratitude journal. Use your cell phone. Create a note that you find a way to just type in one thing every day that you're grateful for, because you need to keep an inventory, particularly in a moment like this when it's so easy to see the worst. And for the parents who are listening, find a gratitude moment of something that your relationship with your child has made you grateful for, or your relationship with your children. Yes, Kat, to pick up from where you left off, that child may not be sleeping. But when they did fall asleep, more than likely they fell asleep next to you. And the whole ability that you have the power to be that sense of safety and security, with all of the imperfections you may be beating yourself up on. And I'm just speaking to you, but I'm using you as a metaphor for the parents who aren't there. All the silent things you'll never say to me on air, but you give yourself hell for in your mind. To that child, you represent safety and security. And you represent comfort that they can't come up with on their own. But if they're next to you, they feel like they can get through it. There is no bigger gift the universe has given anybody than the power of love. And for you to be able to represent that to a child, that's why I fight for parents the way that I do, because you are somebody's universe, particularly in the early childhood stage. You are life in and of itself. And even though they're disappointed and they're dealing with these, for them, the biggest disappointments of their life, the fact that you have the power to hug that child, love that child, and tell them that one day this will get better, and they believe you, that changes everything. And we have the research to show that a hug from one supportive and caring adult can create a stress shield. And the brain creates all of the chemicals, the endorphins that reduce the impact of toxic stress. But toxic stress, when not treated, can cause developmental delays. It can cause malfunctions. Like when you see children, they call it failure to thrive. That's how amazing this relationship is, that when it isn't there, you see stunting in growth, you see health issues, you see learning disabilities that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And all it takes is a loving and supportive adult, not an intelligent, fully credentialed, knows everything adult, but an adult that can say, I love you and mean it. That can help a child get through anything that this moment throws at us. And how do we know this? Because we've studied resilience. Because we've had issues like, while COVID is our generation's, biggest issue, we have other things that people have come through, be it natural disasters, be it murder, be it the loss of a loved one, be it serious diseases. And we have been able to study how people have come through difficult, adverse situations. And these loving relationships are always connected. And like I said, it only takes one supportive and loving relationship with an adult can make all the difference in the world to a child. That's why I focus so heavily on that bond. That's why I took this time to just say, listen, let's have that attitude of gratitude and let's create a journal so we can make sure you can also be clear on who you are in this situation, because I refuse to believe that COVID is going to be the rest of our lives. We are in a moment. It's a difficult moment, but it is a moment. My life didn't start in COVID, and it's not going to end in COVID, because what I can control is my perspective. And I refuse to believe that I can't be the best parent to my child in COVID. In fact, as a researcher, I look for the opportunities to thrive in the midst of COVID. In this moment, we have an opportunity to really teach children resilience. Because everything's been removed, we have an opportunity to really explore the things that our children love. We have a chance to let go of all the control and let them decide how we might engage for learning in the day, because we're not in the school systems in some situations. There's a lot of room to be playful. And who knows more about play than children? And there's an opportunity, there's an opportunity to reevaluate control. Do I know everything as the adult, particularly in the midst of COVID? Nobody does. So if everybody's throwing something at the wall, why don't we let the kids throw a few things and see what sticks? Because that's what we're all doing.
It's interesting though. It's you know what, like this year really has been a year of learning and reflecting and being able to have, or trying to have, the capacity to step back and understand the bigger picture. And I guess the question that I have for you is, knowing that this is a year of turbulence and learning, and there's a few things that you've pointed out in terms of learnings that we all can take on board, things like taking one step at a time, celebrating the small moments, finding gratitude every day, reevaluating control. What are some other learnings that we can take away from a time like this?
I'm going to share some of the three things. Eventually Harvard Center on the Developing Child, you need to endorse me, because I promote the gospel of your research wherever I go. But I like to give, not only, and this is the scholar in me, when I say Dr. Keisha cares, I mean that. And so not only am I giving you what I know will support you on an emotional side, but I want to give you the research. I want to give you the tried and true principles that have 20, 30 years of peer-reviewed endorsement that says this also works. And so three guiding principles that I take from Harvard Center on the Developing Child is that you must protect your mental health as an adult, whether that be in learning how to do breathing exercises when you feel triggered, whether that's, finding things that you enjoy. If you can't take a walk and take your child with you, because I understand some children have unique needs and it may not be possible for you to just take a stroll through the neighborhood. Yeah. I want you to have people that you can rely on, that you can ask them to come in, watch your child while you do nothing but, stand outside, take a quick walk around the block. You need these relationships as well. So as we talk about mental health, it also rolls into the next one, which is having stable and supportive environments that are there for you and your child. whether that's through, if you have a virtual happy hour, if you have a Facebook group that you find, the ability to just chat with, if it's someone you can call, you need those supportive and stable environments for yourself as the primary caregiver, and you also need that for your child. But if you're able to create that for yourself, then you can then give it to your child. Like I use the analogy of a teapot, a teacup, and a saucer that the teacup sits on. If you think of the parent as the teacup, and you think about life and what we do with our 24 hours as that tea pot, if I fill up this teapot with the self-care, with, taking care of my mental health, with having that attitude of gratitude, with taking the bumps and bruises that come with the day, but having the perspective to look at it in a way that isn't burdensome. That ability to catch and release offense, because not all of this is what you control. I talked about spirit murder in one of my last caring conversations, where I just had somebody say some really nasty things to me. And it blew my mind that they did it, but they did it in a public way. And this was someone that I had looked up to. This was a mentor to me, someone that I, at one time looked at in high regard. And when they chose to attack me the way that they did, I handled it gracefully. I, didn't say anything. I, was able to tactfully remove myself. Thank goodness it was an online format. So I had already cut off my camera and muted my mic, so nobody heard me when I was like, what just happened, But it's that internal struggle, right? And we all deal with different versions of offense. It could have been a slight from a colleague. It could have been the loss of something. It could have been an outright insult from someone we love. But having the ability to catch and release the offense. Yes, somebody threw it to you. I talk about, if I'm using this narrative of the teapot, the offense is in that teapot. But do I add more offenses so that my teapot is full of negativity, or do I water it down with self-care and I minimize the strength of what it is? And so when I pour it out, I'm able to catch it in my teacup, yes, but if I keep pouring, it flows out, right? And that saucer, eventually the water flows out. And you can find ways to serve from that saucer. So I could take that offense that I've watered down, and I can teach somebody how to deal with offense gracefully, because I've processed it. And if I'm serving from my saucer, I'm serving from that overflow part of me, then that means my teacup is always full. And when it's not full, that's when we start to see a lot of the things that weigh us down as the adults. Maybe I'm not sleeping. Maybe now I'm irritable, because there's these things that let me know I'm out of balance. Just like my child has the ability to cry, do all these things, they're silently letting you know that they're stressed.
So, you were talking about the teapot and the teacup as something that we can control. We can control how much we can put in the teacup. And that's something that we can choose. We can choose to let go and release that offense. We can choose to use it for something good. We can choose to fill our cup with gratitude. But that's all stuff we can control. That's our mind and our mindset around this, huge thing that we're going through. And we can try and be the best educators, primary educators now as parents, and learn from our children around play. But we're still limited by what we can do, because we're still expected to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and parent at the same time, full time. And the working world hasn't yet caught up to this change. It feels like it's still behind, when everyone is actually in the same boat here. And so many people that we work with are parents, yet we still expect the same amount of production and output as we did before. What do you make of this?
This must be a powerful question, because You had to try and say that several times and it still glitched on you. So I know that someone needs to hear this. I'm going to answer that question from a firsthand experience perspective as someone who dealt with it. And I'm going to answer that question from someone who is now my own boss. And so from the perspective of, you know, I eat what I kill. And if I don't, you know, make these connections, then the money doesn't come in. So I understand the administrative side of this. And I also can see it from the employee side of it. And I'm going to say at the center of both worlds is fear. From the boss perspective, you want everything to go on as usual because you don't want to fall behind. You don't want to lose productivity. You don't want to lose accounts. That might be some of the things driving you, or you may find comfort in the power of your position. And so you are finding like you're creating your normalcy by trying to force everything around you to move as it always did. Administrators and directors who are cognizant of this moment are actually gaining far more grace and employee loyalty by being able to extend grace to their workforce. Of course, nobody can do it for eternity, but it doesn't make sense to force certain people to produce in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, because that employee may produce, but the moment it seems like it's possible to find somewhere else to go, you may lose them. You may have somebody that come through this pandemic with a brand new skill set, because the value of this moment is that it's refining some people's skills. And some people are finding out not only how to be an employee who can work in an office, but they're learning how to work from home. I'm not saying they mastered it. Repeated exposure and repeated practice before it becomes something that you've mastered. We never had to master this before. But for the employees that, you know, figure out when they can do the most work, they're learning, you know, when their children are engaged, like they're figuring out the hours in the day, because I'm talking to parents. They are all figuring out the moments of the day where they can get the most done.
Yep.
And they are figuring out how much they can get done. They may not always hit the target, but they're learning where their strengths are. And when we come out of this pandemic, you are going to have some unbelievable skills.
Yeah.
If the employer can see that, then that is the person you want to train new people. That is the person you want to help figure out what remote working situations should look like. How can we support working parents? Those are the people that you want on these committees. But if you are wasting this opportunity by being insistent that things only happen your way, what you're really doing is growing silent resentment. And I've been that employee. I have produced, and the moment a better opportunity came, I was gone. And I felt no kind of way about it. I felt like I was doing the best thing for myself. Now, from the employee position, you know, who doesn't have the ability to just up and tell the employer, you know, you're asking too much of me because you're worried that you may get fired. You know, the company is already dealing with some severe budget cuts, and you may be definitely competing with someone else to keep your job. I'm not going to diminish the fact that that's there, but I'm going to challenge you to understand, what type of life do you want to live here? Do you want to live a life where you assume that this is the only job you'll ever have, and that you have to basically jeopardize your well-being in order to meet this quota? Like, you see the toll it's having on you. What I've done in these situations, I've done my own self-care check. I'll be very honest with you. I left a 6-figure job because it was killing me inside. I was breaking out like it was a toxic work environment. I was dealing with racism and a toxic workspace. And I realized that there's not enough money in the world health insurance, all of that, I stepped away because I believe that I have enough credentials, enough experience. If I want to find another job, I can get hired elsewhere. If I want to build my own thing, I can do it. And if I can thrive by controlling my work environment, I can go even further. That is the mentality. Like, there's no golden key. Like, I don't have any secret scratch off numbers to tell you, like, hey, okay, play 5, 6, 22 and infinity, hit the lottery and everything's going to be okay. But I can definitely champion you as an adult to believe in yourself and your experiences. And if this work environment is ultimately costing you your own peace, and you've had conversations and nothing is changing, then there's room for an even bigger discussion. Maybe this is life telling you that there's something better, and it's trying to intentionally make this space uncomfortable so you get pushed out of the nest and you start to fly.
I mean, what we are seeing is a lot of like kids sitting on laps on Zoom calls and like, you know, parents' offices in their bedrooms littered with toys and books. And it's kind of the thing that I've enjoyed about it is it's made people human, not just working. You know.
This is not the age of AI. Like, if you want that, you know, robot that looks like me, then work a little bit harder and hire them. But in the meantime, I love it when I see people giving presentations and their child just wanders into the frame and climbs on their lap and starts talking, and they just keep it moving. Like, we are in a pandemic and people are working in crisis. We are not, you know, and it behooves us to stop pretending that everything's normal when it isn't. My baby is in my lap because they had to sit at home all day. And they're just deciding, hey, I know when she's on this lap, you know, when she's on this Zoom, she's a whole different kind of parent. She can't really, kids are brilliant. Like, your kid may know that when this little Zoom camera is on, that it's free reign. What you need to ask yourself is, where is the child who is not on my lap? What are they doing? Because they figured out that I can't move, right? Like, you need to love the child that came to you. It wants you to know where they are. You need to worry about the child that's too quiet right now because they know you're on the Zoom call.
Oh, that's so great.
That's the mastermind you need to keep an eye on because they're brilliant and they're taking full advantage of this moment.
So true. So one of the questions that Angie was, well, one of the things that we were talking about earlier when Angie was kind of framing up this episode is, for a lot of us, you know, who are privileged, you know, working on Zoom and working remotely it's had its challenges, sure, but we have access to online education. We have access to being able to provide our kids with information they can learn from online. What effect is this pandemic having on the abilities for other people who don't have access to be able to educate their children? What kinds of new inequalities are we seeing here?
In the U.S. right now, we are on the brink of seeing a terrifying increase of homelessness. There is currently a rent moratorium, in the sense that, you know, since COVID really took off, like, I think really the end of July, people who were on unemployment within the U.S. were receiving an additional $600 on top of their unemployment. And that kept a lot of families afloat. And that, you know, grace period was from around March or April, I believe. April until the end of July. And it ended in July, and now people are just receiving their state unemployment amount. And Ohio, where I'm at, they happen to have one of the nation's highest. And the maximum you can receive on that, on Ohio unemployment is around, well, it is $480, okay? That's the highest weekly amount you can receive. And they still take taxes out of that. So if you're receiving the highest amount at the end of 4 weeks, a month, you may come in at around $1,500. Once taxes are done, like that's pretty much, that's $1,500 for the month. Now, if you just take that entire check and just use all that money and pay rent, then, problem solved. But where's the food going? And that's assuming that you're a single individual. If you have a child and all these additional things, well, that's a whole other thing. Now, when the $600 was there, then you were receiving $1,000 a week. And that makes more sense to the average person that, you can do a lot with $4,000 and a family, and you can, have that, sense of relief that you're going to be okay. You can focus on other things. There's more room for you to put different things in your teapot, right?
Yeah.
And work on pouring out a better version. But that all ended in July, and it is now September, and states are still struggling to figure out what that second stimulus is going to be. There was an executive order that came down that said, hey, we're going to give everyone an additional $400. And here's how it's going to work. The federal government's going to pay for $300, and the states are going to have to make up the $100 difference. Well, that just created all sorts of confusion because states then had to figure out how are we going to do that. And so currently, I can speak to Ohio. I haven't heard of anyone else yet. People are still just receiving the state unemployment. And as of today, no one has received the additional money. And so what that is doing is that as, we march closer and closer to the end of September, we have yet another round of people who can't pay rent. So what the government said was the CDC, actually, the Center for Disease Control, issued an executive order that said we are putting a moratorium on evictions because people were starting to get evicted because the federal covering had expired. People were starting to get evicted. And so they said no one will get evicted until the end of 2021. But here's what they didn't do. No policy or executive order has dealt with the debt that has occurred and that is continuing to accrue. They simply said that people can't get evicted. So you have a hidden segment right now of the U.S. population that is technically homeless. And the moment the landlords can get these, because they were already filing orders and going into courts, the moment the court deadline opened up and said, okay, you could start filing for evictions, landlords were doing it. And you had all these stories about people worrying about, their evictions, like the countdown had begun. So now they've kicked the can a little further down the road, but we still know that interest on the rent, the money that's owed, the penalties, what it's doing for their credit, all these things are happening in real time. I shared and painted this picture for you because I want you to understand that once this protection ends, you are going to see a massive increase of homelessness. And we need to acknowledge that some of those homeless populations are going to be families. And we know that the reading proficiency level, the New York Times, if you listen to the daily podcast on Sunday, they did a phenomenal, it was a 1 hour and 9 minutes expose on children and homelessness and what this is doing to their education in the age of remote learning, in the age of COVID. So if you can imagine living in a shelter and all the rules that implies and all the lack of resources that implies, what in the world is learning going to look like in that scenario? And then when we think about the mental health, all the things I've been talking about since this podcast started, you begin to see the depth of this problem. And that's why I do the work that I do globally, because anytime I get an opportunity to share a platform, I send out a call and say, listen, this is an all hands on deck situation. I am one of the people who happen to do the research, get the credentials, and be willing to contribute my 2 cents to this problem. Reach out to me, email me, Instagram me, anything I can do to support, I will do it. And I'm hoping that other people who hear this, who have the skill sets, who have the resources, say the same thing within their circles of influence, because this is going to take an all hands on deck approach. It's not about me trying to figure out how many Instagram followers I can get. It's about me trying to connect with as many people as I can to make a meaningful impact, because we have this massive threat. That's just the US. Every nation is dealing with its own subsect of the marginalized, who are even more marginalized and impacted by this moment of travail.
So for you, it's all about childhood literacy, learning and reading out loud. Like, that's where it starts for you.
It's terrifying when we look at it in that direction. Yeah, it's terrifying when we look at it from the literacy perspective, because we understand how fundamental the ability to read is to your overall well-being. So if this is happening to you in early childhood, the numbers, like if you go back to the States, when it comes to children who are literate and proficient, who are dealing with homelessness, we get down to like the less than 20%, less than 16%, less than 12%. That is terrifying to me as a literacy expert, because I understand if at a young age I believe I can't read and I get thrown into a classroom, you know, I'm in the 3rd grade, I'm in of my intelligence. I could be a brilliant person, but I just haven't been educated, and I haven't had the opportunity to be consistently educated and nurtured. But the moment I believe I'm stupid, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Or the moment I am embarrassed, or the moment I refuse to try because I'm so used to failing, then you head down that same school to prison pipeline that has been a well-oiled machine in the US. We know what that looks like. You know how many brilliant people are dead or in prison because of these little failures, you know, along the way. So thinking about ways to not only support the adults who are around them, because I see the unhealed child in the adult. I see all the unhealed pains that occurred, because for a long time, our education systems globally have failed a certain segment of children. Be they marginalized ethnic minorities, if we're going to China, be they the dark-skinned people around the world, be they the poor. There is always a section of some segment of society that was seen as less than. And so when we start thinking about what COVID has done to their experiences within education, how those parents are trying to figure out how to support their kids, because as I shared earlier, they thought someone else would do it, and suddenly it's them. And we're talking about literacy, but let's talk about math. Let's talk about the children who are in higher, more advanced subjects, and their parents were so proud because they never had it. But now they have to sit down and deal with the fear of telling them or teaching them the wrong way, and then it triggering the unhealed pain within them. What do we do about that? And that's why that mental health is so important, because we need to find ways to celebrate the fact that you courageously sat down with that child and you tried. You did it all by yourself. And that's why I love Lucille Clifton's quote. I celebrate the fact that every day something tried to kill you and it failed. I celebrate the fact that even though you didn't get it right, you learned something about yourself. You learned that you still have enough initiative to try. And I celebrate you for loving your child enough to put yourself in that vulnerable position.
So Dr. Keisha, what can we see in terms of the best possible outcome from a change like this? So what ripple effects or trends do you anticipate and why?
I am working, praying, pushing, advocating for stronger parent-child, adult-child relationships to come out of this. I want to see stronger families. Like, Tony has provided us with so many examples of united. We saw protests, but when I looked at the protests, I also saw people coming together, no matter what side of the line they were on. Like, people found community. And whether they were on the side that was trying to enforce the law, people had to protect one another. They had to have each other's back. If they were on the other side of the line that was trying to advocate for change, you saw a lot of people coming together and protecting people along the way, fighting, being heroic. That is a great example of relationships. That if we remove that antagonistic scenario out the way and we just look at the parent-child bond, the adult-child bond, then what you have is an opportunity to have a stronger, loving relationship. There are some memories that are being established right now that some children are going to remember for the rest of their lives. Like, we have the opportunity to do 2 to 3 generations of change. Kat, if we think about your child, I think there's something that's going to come out of this pandemic that your child's going to tell their children. There are things that we can pass down. I want as many of those memories to be as loving, to be as fortifying and hope generating as possible. And that's why I love literacy, because, these children's books, these stories, these bonding opportunities, like, it's more than just reading to teach the child vocabulary and phonemic awareness. I want you to come away with that, with the conversation, with a story. I want you to be inspired by something you read, to have a dialogue, and you share with your child something you experienced as a child. I want you to pull back into your past and bring along some of the people that loved on you and hand that down to your child. That's the other thing that, COVID has allowed us to do. We have far more time. When you look at some of the research studies, some of the silver linings of the pandemic is that a lot of parents are saying they're learning far more about their children than they did in 2019. They're experiencing far more of their development than they might have with other children that are in the house when they were at that age. Like, they are learning a lot more, and a lot of siblings are developing stronger bonds that we don't know where that's going to carry them into the future. But there are a lot of opportunities to come out of this with greater relationships. And for the single guy, and you're wondering, how can I get to know Dr. Keisha? Instagram me. Yes, I sure did. I put in a plug for myself. As we're talking about things we hope come out of COVID, I hope I come out of this with an amazing man. So I can start a family. But in the meantime, I'm here to support everybody else's.
Yeah. I mean, I have heard from a lot of parents how they're having breakfast together every single morning. That never used to happen, And I've heard from countless dads who, traditionally would go off to work, didn't spend that first year with their children, because traditionally mothers looked after their kids, saying wow, I can't ever get this time back, and I'm so grateful for this moment that I have with my child. I don't know if I want to go back to how things used to be, because this is amazing.
And maybe they won't, I in some ways, I am eternally optimistic, because I just refuse. I shared this in a previous caring conversation, but I talked about fear being a negative form of faith. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but I can either choose to be positive about what's going to happen, or I can choose to be negative. That is a choice, to be fearful of what the next day is going to bring. I can face that day with hope, and encounter disappointment, or I could face that day with fear and encounter disappointment and feel further justified in living in fear. And so when we talk about, what can come out of this, I will always hope that we find the things that we lost and we find ways to keep them.
Yeah. And so, like, specifically around you and what you focus on, my burning question for you, Keisha, Dr. Keisha, is, you talk about it can all start with reading a book out loud. It can be that simple to create
what
that
can
time.
Start though? Yeah, like what do you mean? What can all start?
Well, like the mental health aspect for parents, for children, creating that safe environment, creating that moment of feeling safe together to strengthen that bond. It all starts with reading out loud together. Why is that?
So the great thing and why I love reading aloud is because that one simple act packs the biggest punch. Like if you're someone who invests in the stock market, like this is a blue chip stock. Like this is something that's guaranteed to give you a high return on your investment at one of the highest levels ever. And we have the research to back it up. When you read aloud with the child, and if you're the parent child, then you can do it with physical touch, which activates things within the child, which also, adds to that sense of security, adds to that bonding, which is what they need to grow. But then when you add the idea of reading aloud, the literacy aspect is when we bring in education, but we do it in an enjoyable way. And stories that I curate, like it's about having a story that can create this really magical experience. Like I call it magical because when you read aloud in a fun way, like this is not a classroom, this is not, a timed exam. We don't have to be done in 5 minutes. Like even if we don't finish the book, I tell parents, in the pre-COVID days, when you had all these places to be, some parents are like, only have 15 minutes in the day. And I'm saying, well, the research says at a minimum, give it 15 minutes. You may not finish the story, but read, do different voices, have fun with it, create a bookmark and, use that magical bookmark and then come back when you have time and pick up where you left off. Invite the child to really explore the story with you. And when you do that at a young age and you're consistent with that, you create these pathways. It is very difficult for adults who have been absent or children who have experienced, adults that have let them down to just suddenly show up, in a 12-year-old's life and be like, hey, let's read aloud. Like, you can do it, but that's a whole nother session and you'll probably need to schedule a consultation with me because we'll need to figure out some ways to do this in a respectful way that's authentic, and we need to let that child heal and verbalize the disappointments they carry with you around bonding. But we can absolutely build that pathway, but it's a much smoother road when it's something you've done with them since they were little. Like that nurse that was like, you can start reading now. You absolutely can. And I tell parents to do the exact same because a child develops hearing in the womb. And so when you're reading aloud with that child, you're once again providing that comfort because your voice is a voice they heard in utero. And at the same time that they're, relaxing, because if you think about it, being born is some traumatizing stuff. Like all of a sudden I was in this one space, life was one way. And then, a couple of heave holes, I'm out into the world and I got to figure out how to do all these things. Like like kids are so fascinated with their hands and twitching and moving because they were doing all that the way that they're doing it now. Like they were doing it in, in umbilical fluids. Now they're doing it with soft cotton and all sorts of stuff around them. And it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new thing. So your voice that reading aloud, like the whole reason why certain voices can soothe a child is because you were there from the beginning. And then touch, these things, you can bring all that into reading aloud. So when I say like it's the best return on your investment, I mean that, because not only are we learning, but we're bonding and we're fortifying and we're creating experiences that can serve as buffers. If I'm reading to a child about diversity, say I am, I have a European family and everybody in the household looks like us. But if I bring in books that have diverse characters, then I can introduce my child to different children, different nations, different cultures. When they go out into the grocery store and they see people that don't look like them, you're not going to see this grandiose reaction like, who are they? You may see intense excitement because the book has come to life, but you won't see fear. That part. And so again, nothing that I've found as a scholar and a researcher does as much as literacy and reading aloud, which is why I dedicated my entire life and career to it, because it does so much. And at the same time it's doing that in the child, it's doing something for the adult, which is amazing to me, because children, and here's my example of that. If you've ever tried to rock a child to sleep and found yourself knocked out at the same time, children have this ability to release, you're giving that child endorphins as you're reading aloud with them, but they're triggering you to relax. They're triggering a release of endorphins in you because you're finding it's that ebb and flow of relationship. And as you're pouring into them, they're pouring into you. They're giving you hope. At the same time, you're building resilience in them. They're building it in you because you have this moment to come back to. And every time isn't always perfect. And that's why I work as a consultant, because some parents may not have children that want to sit still. You may have super active children. That's okay too. But how you read aloud to them and the type of stories you read aloud to them is going to be different. And so just developing those skill sets, but it's something that works across the board. Even when we're dealing with special needs children, I have the honor of working with people who specialize in children on the spectrum. And they read aloud because they've used my content and they show me, we add additional steps and we, make a couple of changes there. Like any recipe, you add your own seasoning to it. You can always turn out an amazing meal.
I love that.
That's really wonderful. And I love that as really great advice for people for all parents who need that, to refill their own cup and have their children fill their own cups. I mean, in this craziness, we can always come back to sitting together and reading out loud, and everyone can do that.
Yeah, sitting, standing, running around, shouting, because reading aloud looks different depending on the child and the family. True. But you can absolutely find great ways to do it. Yeah.
So we wanted to do something special for today's show. In the lead up to this episode, we asked our community of parents, to share their challenges.
Yes.
Share us their challenges, their fears, and their burning questions for Dr. Keisha to respond to. And so we want to thank everyone in our community for contributing to the show today.
Yeah. We had an overwhelming number of responses from all over the world. From the States, Norway. It was really awesome to see how many people jumped on board with this. And all of us told you that in some way or another, you had been severely impacted by this pandemic regarding your child's access to quality education. You all felt that way. Some of the key themes that came out of your questions include, some of the things we've already spoken about today. So feeling the pressure of being a teacher, parent, and worker, and not feeling like you're succeeding at any one of those things. We've spoken a lot about that today. We've also talked about the fact that the whole world has changed, but the work environment somehow sometimes expects you to be at the same level of excellence and output while everyone's in the same boat. We also heard that you're being confronted with the challenge of being solely responsible for providing quality stimulation, which is so hard as not even just parent and teacher, but also friend. And you don't have that human connection that you used to having. You know, kids aren't running around in playgrounds, you know, bumping into other kids, learning from other kids, or even just family. And then again, like feeling really bad about yourself, like compounding anxiety because you're relying on screen time to solve some of those stimulation issues for you.
Yeah, we've heard parents express their concerns over the lack of control they have over the situation. Again, to what we were talking about at the start of this episode. And then you couple that with the impact of ongoing uncertainty, uncertainty and inconsistency. So, for example, hearing Kat and a lot of my friends who are parents, this back and forth of kids in and out of childcare, just because there's a little sniffle or because there's a spike in cases. And we spoke a lot about that our kids are picking up on their parents' anxiety, fear, and stress, and parents calling that out as well in our community. And then finally, the big thing that has come back from the community, again, something that we've spoken about quite a bit today, is that there's no downtime for parents. The mental health of parents is under great risk, and trying to balance everything during this uncertain time. And it's really hard. It's really hard for everyone, especially for those who have, toddlers and young kids who just always need constant supervision and time. Yeah.
So what, because I've been looking forward to this part of our discussion, because nothing makes me happier than when I get to work with a parent. And in a way, this is an opportunity to do that. So please, I'd like to hear the first question from a parent. Like, I want to authentically address one of their questions and not just give you a glossy answer. Like, let's really unpack something.
Okay. So we got a lot of questions around the topic of reading and activities, which is fantastic because this is all about taking action. So one of the biggest questions is, how do I support my child's ability and passion for reading? You were just talking about reading looks really different depending on the household. It could be running around and reading. Some of our parents shared with us that they have kids that feel like it's a chore to read or just don't feel inspired to do that. What advice do you have here for them?
So for children who are exhibiting, I like to call it literacy fatigue, because most of the times in those scenarios, you had a really ambitious adult somewhere in the picture that was trying to make them a little Einstein, or, trying to get them to read by a certain age, like they hit the ground running in the wrong direction. And so now when you come to that child with the book, they get all sorts of negative ideas, and it's just, no, please don't. Or they may have had an embarrassing situation where they were asked to do something in front of the class and they couldn't, or they didn't do it the way it was supposed to. And so now they carry shame and, a little bit of fear. And so I always advocate for the enjoyable approach. My 4 curriculum, or my 4 foundational concepts: talk, read, sing, play, and maybe for the sake of COVID, we're going to add love. Let that be amongst all of them. And so, when you're dealing with a child who may be hesitant to engage in literacy, I'm going to rely on the relationship you have with that child. Find a book that is somewhere in their interest area. Let them pick the book. Let them, and if they don't want to engage with the book, then you find a book that relates directly to something they enjoy. Kat, tell me something your child enjoys. Like, I don't want to just make up something. So tell me a topic your child enjoys.
So one of the interesting things is my child is slow to warm up, as lots of kids are. He's slow to warm up. So he's
Okay.
quite hesitant of new things. And so one of the books that he really loves, one of the characters is this whale. It's a book called The Storm Whale by Benji Davis. Beautiful. And he loves the whale. And I bought him the second book in the series. And he was really hesitant about this book because it's new. And it took us a really long time. I had to give him the time and space to come, to stop, because it's a bit more complicated as well. It's a bit longer, and he's not the most patient person to get through the whole thing. But I encouraged him to look at the whale pictures first, to see his little friend there. And every time we go to the ocean, because lucky for us, we live within a 5-kilometer radius and we can actually access the beach. We point to the sea and we say, look, there's the whale. The whale lives there. There's the storm whale. He gets really excited. And because of that storytelling that's beyond the book, we've been able to get him used to this new book, which now is his favorite book. So I think, for us in this scenario, we have to, he loves reading anyway, but we wanted to give him more of what he wanted, but we had to be patient with him around this. So now everything is about whales. Everything is about whales.
I can run with that. So for a listener who, may be in a similar situation, I'm going to rewind and go back to, your child loves whales. And he had a favorite book about whales. And, there's a new book, and this is something common, children will repeatedly read a story because it's still new to them. They're picking up something new every time, even when you think they've memorized it. The fact that they can memorize and read the book is big to them because they now, affirm themselves, like, look what I can do, and so they're hesitant to let go of that security that book has provided with them, because maybe they made you proud. Maybe they always know that when you read this story, they're happy and you're happy. And so they don't know if they want to trade that in with the new book, because there's new words and there's new experiences and they haven't mastered the material the way they think you should. But what they're really giving you is all sorts of opportunities to expand the way in which they see themselves. Yes, you see yourself as glorious in this opportunity, but I want to provide you with opportunities to try new things. But what does that mean to a child, right? So one of the things that I would suggest a parent do, you take that, the story that they love, right? And we start telling new stories using the pictures in the old book. We find new ways to explore that same story. So they know the story in the first whale book, like the back of their hand, but we're going to tell a story that maybe takes off where the story ends using the pictures in that favorite old book. And then, we'll, because, we're letting them decide the tone and the pace. So they can pick up the book and they may still tell the story the way it is on the page. You as the adult come in and you model telling the new story using those pictures in the old book. And if they're still feeling reluctant, then we're going to draw some pictures. We're going to take these stories and we're now going to draw our own pictures. We're going to pick up where the story left off. We've already told the story using these old pictures. Now we're going to draw some of our own images that we've taken from our new story, right? And if I'm the adult and I'm weaving this through, one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to find ways, because I've already read the new story. Somewhere in this process, you need to go ahead and read the new book, and you thread moments from the new story into those pictures. And then you tell a whole new round of stories. You see, we're doing this at a gentle pace. We're not forcing this to happen. We're leaving all these pockets of exploration for you and your child to have all these new enjoyable moments. There's no pressure. I'm not upset because I've written, we've got this new book, or I'm tired of hearing this story. We're finding new ways for us to expand this experience. And so if we have first, gone through the old book and told new stories with the old book using the pictures, then we've drawn pictures of the story we just created, and I've embedded concepts or images within the pictures that I know are in the second book, then as I'm retelling my story using the pictures we've drawn, now I'm telling another oral story using our pictures. And by then, there's an opportunity to say, oh, wow, I wonder if there are aspects of this story that carry over into the new book. Mm. Shall we look? Shall we find it? Let's just look at the pictures. Not forcing my way, because I'm not coming into this with a spirit of control. I'm coming into this with a spirit of exploration, wonder, and joy. And so we don't have to read the new book because I bought it, but we can maybe find some pictures in this new book that support our story. And you know, you can ham it up. You can ham it up. Oh, wow, look at this picture. I wonder what this story is about. Oh, well, we got to wait till we read it. I'm not going to ruin the surprise. Turn the page. Oh, wow, look at this picture. I wonder what these words mean. Can you read it? Don't read it. I don't want you to tell me. I'm going to wait until we read it together. Do you see that? Like all this joy, all this excitement. And then when the child is ready, because you constantly let them decide, you know, should we read it tonight? No? Okay, let's tell another story. Or, you know, how do you, like, that sense of empowerment does so many things. Like, I just walked you through a scenario, but what I've really showed you how to do is empower that child to make decisions. I've affirmed that a child's ability to make a decision and take a position and support it. But at the same time, I'm telling my child and showing my child that you can always change your mind. And that every opportunity is a new opportunity to explore. Just because you didn't want to explore yesterday, or you didn't want to explore, you know, when we did the other activity, doesn't mean that you can't change your mind. How many adults would be better human beings if they realize you can always change your mind? Absolutely. I absolutely love that. I care. Yeah, that's why Dr. Keisha exists. I'm about this life. I am here. I am here for it. And I love taking these nuanced moments that happen within the home and showing parents how they can explode it into these dynamic learning opportunities. What you think is stagnation is really an opportunity to mine for gold. I love that, because we did also get a question around memorizing versus reading. And you answer that question really with a wonderful way of expanding the story beyond just the book through curiosity and exploration at their pace. Yes. I really, really love that. We got a lot of questions for parents. You know, they're all in lockdown. They don't have access to the same things they're used to around different activities for different ages and what to do, like, beyond just doing screen time. Like, it seems to feel like a failure if you put your children in front of screens. Do you have any general advice here? Because, I mean, you could go into this for ages, because, you know, there's lots of things you can do. Well, it just so happens that if you go through any of the Dr. Keisha Cares resources, you will see talk, read, sing, play. I am giving you a play-by-play, and you don't have to do it in this order. And like I said, for COVID, we added love. But you can, like, I'm going to stick with the well scenario, okay? So we can have conversations around whales. Like you said, we were out and about, and the ocean is, you know, within, you know, walking or driving distance. We can visit the ocean, and we can have a conversation with the whales. And we can be silly while we do it. If you ever seen, what is it? Finding Dora, or what was that? Yeah, Finding Dory. Yeah. Thank you. Finding Dory. You know, the whale voice. Sorry, listener, but I'm that type of educator. The woo. We can have this conversation. And, you know, like, and I've done this with my niece and nephew. We have literally made up our own fake language, because I wanted my niece and nephew to realize that English is the only way to communicate. And sometimes people, you know, use sounds and it can mean a language. And so using verbal, you know, sounds, but body language, like, I was teaching them to communicate. But we were doing it in a silly way, like, kappa, kappa, kappa. You know, we were talking and making up our own language, and you can have a ball. Like, I invite adults to play. But like, even when I say talk, like, we can talk about the subject matter. We can use silly, made up languages to talk. You know, if we want to be whales, and we can talk about whales using our whale voices, and we can communicate that I want milk in a sandwich using a whale voice. That sounds amazing, by the way. Like, I can see some kid holding up peanut butter or Vegemite, depending on where they are in the world. We're like, woo! You know, and so all this joy that comes from it. So that's one way. That's just talk. Read. We've spoken about read at length. I just went through a great example of how you can read and all these different ways you can expand that experience. Sing. Why sing is included is because singing is tied to memory, and it's a great tool for teaching. So sing songs about whales, make up your own songs, explore the internet and find some songs around whales and sing. Now, you know, unfortunately, Baby Shark has shown us that some of these songs stay in our minds and we can't get rid of them. That's the cost of admission. You had a kid, at some point you're going to pay the toll. So get comfortable with that. You're not going to control every great song that gets stuck in your head. Sorry. Yeah. But that's the cost of admission. So like I said, you know, you can sing, you know, have some whale songs. Invite your child, you know, go exploring for whale songs. Like, if we are going to be on screens, then let's find ways to learn something useful that we can take outside of the screen. So, you know, we use the internet to find some great whale songs. We learn these whale songs together, and then we go sing this song to the whales, or we sing it to the book about whales, right? And then play. You can play in so many great ways. Like, you can play, like I shared, with creating these different stories, these art projects. You can have a talent show where, you know, you bring your whale story to life and you assign people characters, and it's this fun way. But what you're actually doing is showing children that stories can be acted out. We see that in plays, we see that in screens, you know, in writing a story that you then act out. That's screenwriting, that's script writing, that's producing, that's directing, like all of these things that can lead them down career paths, but it's in a fun and engaging way. And if you're really listening to me, then you realize that everything I explained to you, at no point did it require an expensive curriculum of activities outside of looking for a song on the internet. You know, I also said you can make up your own song. These are things you can do in a homeless shelter. These are things you can do in a living room. Like, I want parents and adults to realize that you just giving your child your attention, your undivided attention, is a gift that cuts across socioeconomic factors, but it's just as impactful at every level. So the poorest parent can be just as influential as the richest parent if you're doing this and you're engaged. But a rich parent who just gives a child a screen and walks out will always come second to a parent that sits down with them and engages with them. Now, you can pay somebody to do that, because like I said, it only takes one supportive relationship, or you can add to that math and give that child 2 supportive relationships.
This leads me to my next question around supporting children learning at home. Now, if we think about, like, we spoke about all different types of learning here, but let's think about a classroom scenario. So, like, if parents are given curriculum that with a child and go through something with them, what are some really good ways or tips up your sleeve around supporting children to sit and focus around learning at home with the parents?
Yeah. So with this one, this is where my consultations really come into play, because I need to have an understanding of what the rhythm of that household is, because that home environment is a tricky thing, and that parent relationship with the child is an interesting thing. Like, what type of child? are we talking about? Like, it's almost like there are all of these little nuances. So the general things I've shared with you, apply across the board. But when we start talking about concentration, getting the child to focus, I need to have an understanding of what is that child drawn to? How has that child been socialized to learn? What age is that child? Because if they're very young, then it may not be useful to have the child sit down. Maybe we need to learn outside. Maybe we need to find engaging ways to learn. Maybe we need to find ways to do it when we know that this is the calm hour for that child. Like, there are all these rhythms, but that's why I offer consultations, and I do it at very, very reasonable rates, be it 30 minutes or an hour, because I want to know more about that family and that dynamic so that I can give tips that actually carry water with that child.
Okay, great. And then I love these questions the most, I have to say, out of everything that came through, because I think that we really talked about like the mental health aspect throughout this podcast. But the questions that I really enjoyed the most were like the teaching important things outside the classroom type questions, like, when can I start having important conversations with my child regarding things like race? When can I start to do that?
Yes. So to that parent, call me. Because you can start doing it from day one. But I think what you're listening for is you're thinking that it's a conversation, but you can begin talking with the books that you expose that child to. Kendi, his Anti-Racist Baby, it's a board book. And it lays out, how do you create an anti-racist child? And you see same-sex marriages, like you see same-sex relationships, you see children who are gender fluid, you see children who may be identified as a girl, but they identify as a boy. You have stories that, show a red crayon in blue packaging, and everybody's telling this crayon that, oh, you're blue, and this crayon feels red, so like there are all these ways to begin introducing your child to a different perspective, and how you have the conversation changes depending on what age they're at. But the way you check and see if the conversation is landing, you ask them about what they're thinking when they see these pictures, or when you explain this page of the story, and you invite that dialogue. It's not a quiz. That's another thing I love working with parents on doing, is showing them how to engage with their child in a conversational tone versus a teacher tone. Because a lot of parents, if you don't have someone like me working with you, your go-to form of teaching may be to replicate how you were taught. But when you're talking about the home learning environment, no, it's a very different thing. And that's why the way in which I advocate for reading aloud, like I teach parents how to bond through the literacy. I'm not that person that's teaching you like, hey, okay, let's get the phonics, let's make sure they're reading. Because when I do my job well, it comes on its own. I have a Rolodex of successful families that I work with whose children just have unbelievable academic skills, vocabulary, communication, but they have social, emotional skills as well, because we're teaching to the whole child.
Yeah. And we can all, I know that you've got a list of books and resources to help encourage that early learning right from the start, where children can just get used to seeing different types of people in their stories. And I guess like the other thing that, on the topic of COVID, a lot of parents are asking the question, well, how do I have this conversation with my child? How do I talk to them about what's going on?
Absolutely. Well, see, this will probably be the shortest answer that I've given you the whole time we've been talking. Go to YouTube, type in Dr. Keisha Cares, click on, there's 2 great videos that have book lists, research, links, all in the description. And they're an hour a piece. So I didn't just give you 5 minutes, like I give you a course. the topic, COVID worries. And there's another one specifically titled How to Talk to Your Child About Change, how to deal with change or how to discuss change in early childhood. And I have some videos that talk about how to discuss racism, how to stand up to racism. Shout out to Sesame Street. They did an outstanding job on this topic with CNN. But I have all sorts of resources, and all of those videos come with curated book lists, links to the research I use. I make a point to use open access research so that no one who wants to read where I'm getting my citations or wants to read or learn on their own is prohibited. I don't believe in hiding the data or being the only one who knows. Like, I want to share and shout this from the rooftops. So use any of my resources. If you get on my Instagram page or you follow me on Facebook, I have these curriculums. My last video that talks about fear, or any of them, but I know my some of my most recent work where I talk about, these 10-minute curriculums. Like, I did one, it was discussing the fear of failure, but it was a week where everything that could have happened that week happened. And I was scheduled to do one of these caring conversations. I'm like, listen, guys, I can't talk about the fear of failure. We need to talk about our mental health right now. So I'm just going to pivot. So if you look at that video, I have put in the description every 10-minute curriculum I had created up to that point. I think there's about 6. So even in that, you have 60 minutes of a resource on top of and I even did that video. Usually my videos are an hour, but I ended that video early so that a parent or an adult could practice and use one of those curriculums right there in that time slot. So yeah, there's all sorts of resources available. Dr. Keisha Cares, put that in YouTube. And all my stuff will come up and you'll see my face and all of the materials that I've created, even some of my keynote speeches, because like I said, I'm global. So when I'm asked to give a keynote or do something, I did one for an organization in Canada and I was talking about racism, and I use this great analogy and I talk about the elephant in the room. And if we really want to use this moment to impact change, then we need to, acknowledge that there's an elephant that's been defecating all over the room since it's got there. So let's talk about that. But what I'm sharing is that you can use funny analogies like poop. And every kid loves the word poop.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. I think adults do too.
Poop.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can use poop to explain racism. That part, right? So we can take this thing that a child understands and we can get them to understand why racism is such a problem.
I must say, Dr. Keisha, I've looked at your resources online and your, everything that's available on YouTube. And even as a non-parent, I've really enjoyed, looking through your content and being part of that.
Yay!
Only for myself, but then also because a lot of my friends have kids. So I really encourage all of our listeners out there who might be in a similar situation as I am, not having a child of your own, but highly, highly encourage everyone to still have a look because it's really, really great stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't have, any kids yet, future husband, if you're out there, hey. But in the meantime, it's great to know that people who may not have, firsthand child rearing experience can still contribute. And we can. We absolutely can, because we always encounter a parent. And, we can be superior read aloud experts by the time we do, if we ever have children. But even if we don't, you can be the cool play auntie that's awesome to read aloud with, that right. Adult child bond is just as powerful.
Yeah, that's right. And the great thing is that, as Dr. Keisha mentioned, you can find her on drkeishacares.com. She's got Instagram, Facebook, and there's a whole lot of awesome resources. And as part of this podcast, she is offering one free 30-minute consultation, which is fantastic. I mean, I just got a free one right now myself. And I'm like, wow, like you've just given me so much inspiration to do with my son. I'm so excited now. You know, I'm just like, yes, let's go do all whale things now. I'm gonna sing in whale. I'm so excited. So
you gotta let me know how that is though. Like I want to hear the follow-up.
I will totally. So all you need to do to access this free 30-minute consultation is subscribe to Dr. Keisha's YouTube channel and follow her on Instagram at Dr. Keisha Cares. You can also, like I said, get access to free resources on the YouTube channel. Each video contains its own mini curriculum of books, links, and research to support children and adults.
Yes. And Kat, I just want to add to that, for those who are entering the contest for the free consultation, when you subscribe on Instagram, send me a direct message with something from this podcast. That way I'll know you listen. Like, don't just, someone told you about it, so you DM'd me. No, I want to make sure you heard how awesome the Reinvention Podcast is and you listened.
Well, it's been such a dream having you with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge. I know that it's meant a lot it's going to mean a lot to parents out there for today. And apologies to everyone for the shaky episode with the internet connection, but it's just part of COVID living, isn't it?
It really is.
It couldn't handle all the fabulousness we were bringing. Like, it was three dynamic women. We were too powerful. We were messing up the Wi-Fi connection. But, you got some of this sugar. They got some of this grace. They'll be all right. They got enough to hold them over till the next episode.
That's right. Well, thank you again.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that was such a great conversation with Dr. Keisha. And I think there's a really big theme here around delaying the issue. The cause and effect of these systems, these relationships, and the butterfly effect of these experiences. So let's just start by looking at the parent-child scenario. As kids, the way that we were taught and how we felt in those moments and, in those moments of learning has such a huge impact on us without knowing. We can actually pass that experience and those expectations, that shame and that fear to our kids. Things like bullying, numeracy. Like for me, I still have a mental block against anything that's mathematical because of what my experiences was as a child. There's so much fear and shame around dyslexia and not learning the same way as other people learn. And what we're seeing, what Dr. Keisha's, biggest concern is that with things like the pandemic being such a huge, massive traumatic event, that it's the perfect ground for these triggers to come back. And without knowing, we could be passing this on to our children. So instead of tackling these issues in the moment when these adults were actually children, they're left unresolved and have the potential to be passed on to these future generations. It's like a snake biting its own tail as an unintended consequence.
Absolutely. And, what we also heard was Dr. Keisha really pointing out how this pandemic is also delaying the housing problem. We're through this pandemic going to start creating another traumatic event for many, many families out there. And we're starting to see a new inequality surface here, which is homelessness, but through a pandemic. And we've got to remember, when we look back at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's not just shelter, but it's also your own personal mental health as well. The mental health of parents, mental health of children, of families, and that importance of looking after yourself. But then, how do you possibly look after yourself and your mental health when you're struggling to make ends meet and not really knowing when an end is in sight or when things are possibly going to be able to improve and things being completely out of family's control? We think education during a pandemic is hard, but when it's all over, it's going to be even worse for people when they don't have a home.
It's going to be a huge consequence. And when we think about the biases that are at play here, there's one called present bias, which is about favoring the rewards in the moment rather than thinking about the long-term rewards at the end. And I know that that's usually, you know, towards like things that are really positive, but this is a really negative view on that, where we're looking at a situation where we're just trying to deal with the present moment and saying, okay, we're just going to put a moratorium on rentals. We're not going to charge people, but we are going to charge interest, of course, because the landlords still need to make money. They're still losing out of money. And so at the end of 2021, when, you know, the moratorium has been lifted in the States, and I know that that's really similar in a lot of places in the world, Australia included, what's going to happen at the end of this? And it's just delaying this issue.
Exactly.
And I can kind of feel this like bubbling thing just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there might be a lot of people who are really concerned about that, and at the same time just trying to deal with living day to day.
Absolutely.
I wonder what's going to happen if this continues and this problem hasn't actually dealt with before the end of that point.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the conversation we had with Lauren as well, you know, looking at our own mortality and at the same time, you know, looking away a little bit, the ostrich effect, where it's like, let's not look at this now, let's not worry about it, it will sort itself out. I think in this scenario, perhaps it's a little bit different in the fact that we're looking away, not because we don't want to stare at the sun, you know, a reference that we use with Lauren, but more because there's so many other things that we have to deal with. And our attention is, and our focus is spread so thin across so many things that we can't control.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. So what did we learn here in this episode? What can we all start doing now?
Okay, so my biggest takeaway here was Dr. Keisha talking about putting on your own oxygen mask first. And I loved her teacup analogy of really starting to take control and looking after yourself. Step first, look after yourself so that you can support others around you. And that change really needs to start with yourself. You know, looking at what you can control within your own sphere of influence. Choose what you want to take in, choose how you want to look after yourself and how you can nourish yourself. And, you know, allowing adults and parents out there to be able to do that, and then to be able to, I guess, see also when they feel like they're out of balance, and maybe also starting to see those signals come through in their kids' behaviors or in their families' behaviors.
Yeah, I saw this really great quote the other day, which was, you need to take time to invest in your wellness, because if you don't, you will be taking time to invest in your sickness.
Absolutely. It's so true, isn't it?
Again, it's the theme of delaying, isn't it? Yeah. What I also loved was that Dr. Keisha brought to light the importance of us not taking for granted the new skills that we're learning now as workers and as parents and as people in general. We're becoming more efficient. I think productivity for a lot of people has just gone up because you just have to make decisions really quickly. You're learning about the times of day that work for you better, which is really different. We're also seeing humanity at work. We're looking at people's homes through Zoom calls and that kind of thing. And it's making us a little bit less, you know, worried about how we look, how we show up for work, because we're all just people. We're all going through this pandemic together, and we're all just trying to make it work. And the other thing is, she was bringing up a lot of the movements that we've been speaking about on these podcasts that have been connecting and uniting us as people through different forms. And we may not be able to go out and protest together around things that matter to us, but we are connecting now in different ways more than ever. And you know, one of the things she talked about was the fact that because families are all being together and spending more time in the same space, memories are being made right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it's so true. I really, really feel that. I think a lot of people do. And to pay attention to the fact that the new skills that we're learning are new resilience. We're creating resilience with our children. We're creating resilience with ourselves. And there's a whole lot of new leaders emerging in a space where they can work from home, they can balance work and life in the same space, and they can still manage to do things. So give yourself some credit for all the work that we've all been doing. We've been doing great. And remember to make sure that you pay attention to what it is that you're doing, and not just see the negative, but also just say to yourself, well done, because I sat down and I'm trying. And that's really, in so many cases enough, especially when you're sitting down with your child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So good.
Well, that's a wrap from us. The Reinvention Podcast is produced by Make Studios. Make Studios is an innovation company helping organizations, teams, and individuals thrive in times of change.
We partner with bold leaders looking to reinvent systems and organizations to create a better world. Reach out if you're keen to work with us. You can find our podcast and much more on our website at makestudios.com.au/learn or makestudios.asia/learn. And special thanks to Dr. Keisha for joining us on the show today.
Till next time, keep reinventing.